Okay, let's take a look at another example. So truth, as I said, I think it was really groundbreaking and something to look at, especially since it involves misinformation, and in that case, really serious misinformation and the attempt to undermine, scientific information on the part of the tobacco companies. But let's look at a completely different example in the area of social change, and that's repositioning same-sex marriage. And this happened about between 2005 and 2010. So now over the years, you could say that there's been a lot of myth, confusion, misinformation, and disinformation about same-sex relationships. And so around 2005, a number of LGBT foundations wanted to do something decisive. So they hired a firm, Godwin Simon, a West Coast strategic consulting firm, and they conducted some deep dive research that showed that the general public had a kind of stereotype of individuals that were in same-sex relationship. And they found that they were often perceived like this: kind of promiscuous, maybe disconnected from family connections, maybe a bit isolated. So kind of a negative image. And they wanted to do a campaign that would reposition same-sex relationships and shift the feelings in favor of same-sex marriage. So they considered a number of approaches. One of them was just a rights-based campaign, that why shouldn't everyone have the same right to marriage? Um, but they decided to go based on their research when they really looked at what people valued and um, and decided to speak to people's values and not argue with their logic. They shifted to a different kind of campaign. And that campaign focused in on family values and issues of love and connectedness. So a very different kind of campaign. Rather than arguing and stressing rights and kind of getting in people's faces, they went a slightly different route. And just to give you a sense of how they made that real, here's a PSA that was created called the Gardner Family. So let's take a look at this and then see what you make of this.
4 generations of our family sitting around this table. Dottie and I've been together for 59 years now. I flew in the last battle of World War II. I couldn't see how anyone who had been in combat could ever be cruel to anyone ever again. It takes a great deal of bravery to be a lesbian. I'm so proud of Katie and Alex.
We're pretty proud of you.
Oh, good. Marriage is too precious a thing not to share.
I would, in my lifetime, really like to be able to see Katie and Alex get married legally.
This isn't about politics. It's about family and how we as people treat one another.
Okay, so as a result of that campaign and other efforts, of course, the sentiments around same-sex marriage in the United States shifted dramatically from over 60% disapproval around 2005 to well over, I think it was 66, 67% approval by 2010. Really one of the most rapid and remarkable changes in social attitudes and norms that we can point to, at least over such a short period of time. At the same time, some notable policymakers shifted their position. The president of the US, Obama, and soon a Supreme Court decision came down in favor of, of same-sex marriage. So the power of positioning and in kind of speaking to people's values and identity rather than arguing with their logic. So any comments? We can take a couple of minutes and really get any thoughts on those two examples from Truth and then from Heartwired.
All right, so we have a few comments coming in. People saying it's powerful. The more I learn, the more I think that there is overtone in the back. Let's see, what else are people saying? Other comments, it'd be great to look at impact studies of the Truth Campaign. Thanks for this example. Carlin says, both examples were supported healthy public policies. Would it have been successful without the support? And Nicole says, I think having a war veteran who's from an older and more conservative generation embrace change makes a big difference. And moving up, common positive emotions is something that Fernanda is contributing. Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of parallels between both the Truth Campaign and this latest ad.
The I really love both of these examples, and I think there's so much that you can learn from them. And I often go back to both of them. Really, they're slightly different. They're both examples of, in my mind, they're examples of repositioning and reframing issues. And I think when we come up against something that we want to argue with, where we want to take issue with, and say, well, that's wrong, that's misinformation. You have kind of an impulse to say, at best, just put out correct information, but we have trouble changing the narrative. How do you really change the narrative? And these are two examples where they almost use jujitsu to kind of, keep the momentum. I mean, not really face the momentum head on, but they dug deep into what people really valued. Like in Heartwired, they went back to some basic universal values of love and family. And what's better than this kind of intergenerational, going to, grandpa, and he's a war veteran, for Christ's sake. So really digging deep into what people valued. Now, they didn't come up with this, from out of the blue sky. They did deep dive research, the kind of research, maybe it wasn't human-centered design, but that kind of deep dive research where they found out what did people value. And this is what people valued: love and family. And that's where they positioned their issue. And they really spent very little time arguing with that initial, disapproval and that stereotype. They just didn't argue with it at all. And in the Truth Campaign, there've been a lot of campaigns arguing about the facts around smoking, and Truth didn't back down from the facts. As a matter of fact, they put them forward. But what they really did is they unmasked the big tobacco for what it really was: a kind of you could call it a social mobilization campaign. Some people, the Florida Department of Health said it was a campaign by youth for youth, and you could characterize it in different ways. But the fundamental thing I think that it did is it repositioned big tobacco from something slick and cool for youth to something sleazy and that you don't want anything to do with. And it empowered youth to take action on their own and made them look good in the process. Again, speaking to some core values of youth, of wanting to be empowered and not wanting to be lectured to, as they had been by our public health friends, by their parents and teachers. So here they took matters into their own hands, so in a very empowering way. All right, so I think some important lessons to take away there, if we can unpack them. So now I want to move to maybe a more familiar P, promotion, also known as social and behavior change communication. And just a very quick definition. I won't try for anything very complicated, but generally we consider SBCC the integrated use of a range of communication approaches. Could include mass media, newer media, community level activities, really all levels of communication and media channels to influence norms and behaviors pertaining to health. So not terribly complicated. I'm going to focus on two basic areas. I want to talk about messages and channels. Messages a little bit more, and then channels a little bit less. But the reason I want to focus on messages is because it's a term that we all use, that we're all familiar with, and yet I want to make sure that we have a common understanding of what it is, because messages are really at the heart of communication, and we deal with it every single day, and we talk about it all the time in our planning. So I think one of the things that we often do is we conflate messages and behaviors. So something like wear a mask, eat fruits and vegetables, stop smoking, they're often called messages, but they're actually only behaviors. Now, a behavior can be turned into a message pretty easily, such as stop smoking, but it's not a very effective message. So how do you turn, what are the full dimensions of a message that make them effective? A part of it is the behavior itself, but let's take a look at what are the various parts of a message. So in order to change behaviors, and I'm simplifying a little bit, but I think this is something important. I think these four concepts are important to remember and keep in mind when it comes to messages. These are the four things that messages can convey that will influence people to change behaviors. One is benefits. What if I perform the behavior, what can I expect? What's the benefit? The second are consequences, something bad that can happen if I don't follow the advice that I'm given. Skills and self-efficacy, to make sure that people are comfortable performing the behavior, that it's not difficult, or that they can see that it's something that they can do. And then lastly, and importantly, the social dimension, utilizing the influence of others in various ways. So let's take a look at this. What do we mean by benefits? Because benefits are often at the very, one of the more important elements of how messages are constructed. So in essence, we could say that a benefit is a promise that we make. So a promise of something that'll happen in the future if the person undertakes the behavior. What kinds of promises? Well, some of the most powerful promises are these. Things like a promise of health, promise of safety, romance, social acceptance, very, very powerful need, social rejection being a very powerful fear. Also the promise that we can avoid something bad if we follow the advice. In a complete message, we could say, is that promise based on a behavior that sometimes also includes a reason why? So it might look, if you're developing a creative brief or mapping out what your messages might look like, here's one way that you could map it out pretty easily. If you do the behavior, you will experience the benefit because of a specific reason why. So you notice that the message has those three elements. And we'll look at some examples, and be interesting to see how easy or difficult it is to tease out those three dimensions. They're not in every message. Sometimes some are implicit, some are more explicit, but I encourage you to go beyond simply stating a behavior and seeing if the full dimensions of an ideal message. Some simple examples. We mentioned Volvo. So I didn't get this from Volvo, so apologies to them if this is not how they see it. But their basic message might be, if you drive a Volvo, it's the behavior, you'll feel safe. That's the experience, the promise. Why? Because Volvo has undergone rigorous safety tests, and they really do stress that and bring that home. An example from another field, if you use this brand of deodorant, you will feel confident in social situations. Why? Because it's a strong and effective deodorant. So some very simple examples from the commercial world. And you see the benefits that I've pulled are fairly high level benefits can exist at really any level. I mean, a benefit is anything that people consider to be a benefit. So they can be high or low. But some of the strongest and most compelling promises or benefits are what we call go beyond those immediate benefits, and they connect with what are really universal values, or pulse points. Some people call them extended benefits. And often you can do a laddering exercise to see if you can come up with more powerful benefits. And here are some examples, things like, we've seen some of them in some of the ads that we looked at. You've mentioned some of them in your comments: achievement, power, status, acceptance, family, security, and so forth. So we don't need to appeal to all of them, but in particular situations, if we can drive to these pulse points, they can be very powerful motivators for people. It has to make sense with whatever it is that we're promising, but these are things to keep in mind. We're often asked about fear appeals. Does fear work? And it's a strange question, and I kind of hate the question, but the answer is yes, sometimes, and in some ways. So there's a theory, a model called the parallel process model, EPPM, that's been so nicely illustrated here by my colleagues at Johns Hopkins, who I've unfortunately cut off their logo, so apologies to them. But basically what it says is that people do respond to fear. But just like the fight or flight response, they can react in a couple of ways. They can react productively if they perceive a threat, and especially if that fear or perceived threat is coupled with a sense of what they can do and a sense of self-efficacy or confidence that they can take that action. So if that takes place, people can control the fear and they can accept the message. If that's not in place, that people become fearful and they feel out of control, that they don't feel that they're really given the tools or the means to deal with it, it can result in the opposite, either disregarding the message, disregarding the messenger, denying that the problem even exists. So all of those things take place if fear isn't handled appropriately. So I think the last bullet point here is kind of the right one. So you need a balance between perceived threat and perceived self-efficacy. And by balance, in my mind, it's really putting the weight on perceived self-efficacy and alluding to the fear. People become fearful pretty quickly. They don't really need a lot of information to become fearful. It kind of exists. People are afraid of certain kinds of things, and that it doesn't take a lot to remind them of that. Now here's kind of a silly example, but a lot of advertising has fear in the background of their message. And you see it in deodorant ads. Here is an example from a mouthwash ad. You can't, in this case, she says, you cannot brush bad breath away, reach for Listerine. So what's the fear? The fear here is really the fear of rejection, right? So whether it's deodorant or mouthwash, it's a real fear that you're going to be stigmatized, and there are certainly many products out there that if you think ads are manipulative, you might say they prey on those fears, but they turn it around in a very positive message. So she's able to play tennis, work up a little bit of a sweat, and not really worry about her breath because she's used Listerine. So it's that sense of self-efficacy, self-confidence, and that alleviates the fear. Okay, now let's take a look. I'm going to show, if we have the time, Tina, Liz, can I just do a time check?
You got time. I think it was is it 10 more minutes? Or yeah,
Okay,
about
great.
10 more minutes.
Right. I want to show at least 2 of these ads. I've got 4. I'm probably not going to show all 4, but let me show the first 2, and then we'll talk about them. And what I want you to look for in these 2 ads, these are both out of the commercial sector, and see if you can distinguish in both ads the behavior that they're promoting, the benefit that's associated with that, and if there's a reason why. So let's take a look at the first one.
Thanks. Bodyform Secure Fit towels have an all-round barrier, guard walls, and absorbent core for triple protection against leaks. Because we all have bigger things to think about than our periods. Bodyform. Live fearless.
Okay, that's Bodyform, part of their Live Fearless campaign. So you can start putting comments in the chat or on Slido. But in the meantime, I'm going to show another spot. This one quite different for Google.
I had so much time to spend with my boys.
Watch it, watch it.
How is it? What? Hey, you okay? You did touch the food.
Okay, you take attendance? Yeah. Thank you, Claire. Okay.
Who's Mary Jane Patterson?
She was the first Black female college graduate.
Okay, so any comments on those? Can you tell what are the behaviors in either of those ads? And then what are the benefits that are associated with it and reasons why?
All
Do we have
right,
any
let's
comments?
see. Nicole says behavior, user pads, benefit, feel free to do whatever you want without restriction. Carlin says behavior, use body form, fear, embarrassment, benefit, no leaks, no big red spots on your garments. And I think more are coming in. Let's see. For some reason, Slido likes to just post a bunch of stuff all at once. Abigail says wear body form, avoid embarrassing situations, achieve greatness without hassle. And Janet says be safe and love in many ways. And Elena says use Google. Google knows everything and understands changing environment. And Malik says both ads are relatable and situation based. Oh, Lisa says the parenting one made me cry, too close to home, building empathy and showing understanding of lived experience.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah, the good the body format, of course, doesn't do much for me, but I do like how they've you know they've put the features of the product, which they do a nice job of actually articulating the features, right? That it's you know, comfortable, it fits, it's highly absorbent, and then they put it in this torture test environment with this feeling of confidence that you can do most anything with body form. And I'm going to show another ad from body form that is pretty edgy, and I'm curious to get people's reactions, and just to show how you can take you can go beyond features to something that's much deeper. The Google ad I found kind of subtle. You know, it's, yeah, it brings tears to your eyes. It's funny. You know, the woman holding up the help sign while she says, "We're having a great time here." And I think it's quite subtle in how they, I mean, what are they really promoting? They're promoting the Google search feature, you know, and something that maybe people don't realize is that they can search for all kinds of things in Google. They can search for, you know, things to do with the kids while at home, you know, so you don't go crazy. And so it's a very pragmatic ad that's pushing their fundamental product, which is Google search. But how do they do it? They do it within this environment of, we're all dealing with crazy times, and somebody mentioned empathy, right? So it's very empathic, looking at realistic situations in the home, things that you can identify with, and really putting it in a lifestyle context, so that you can see how Google is a part of your life. They don't have to convince you that it's something to use. They don't have to tell you, hey, guess what? You can use Google search for these things. They just put it right into context. So the benefit is obvious. And the benefit goes beyond sort of the immediate benefit, but it's the benefit of being able to spend time with the people that you love, even when they're driving you crazy, right? And the features, Google doesn't need to say much. We are so familiar with it, but it does show you. It shows you that search bar if you didn't know how to use it. It's right there. So there's an awful lot in that, in that Google ad. But in both ads, they do articulate behaviors, benefits, and features quite nicely. But they don't put the emphasis on the behavior that they're trying to encourage. They put the emphasis on the benefit. Did everybody get that feeling? I'm gonna take that as a yes and move on to, I want to show this other, manage my way through my slides here. Another body form ad that I really like, and that kind of takes benefits to another level. Okay, what was the benefit there? How did that strike people? Comments?
Antonio says, I use body form because shit happens, but it will not stop me.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it.
Carlin, I'm appreciating this. All the dudes are getting this. He says, bleeding is part of life. There's no success without some blood. I love it. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And Madhub says, strength and resilience is the message.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know what, I don't know if you guys like the ad, if you feel empowered by it. I listened to an interview with the women who created it. Yeah, strong image of women, strength, resilience. The women, there were two women who created it, and this whole campaign, I think the campaign is actually called Blood. And this is probably the edgiest of the executions. I think it's been controversial. I think some people were concerned about it. But in other executions, they showed a red liquid being poured over the product, unlike the fake blue liquids that have always been done. And they said, we just wanted to break the stigma of menstruation. And I think this was an attempt to be edgy and confident and just say, come on, folks, you don't need to have a little bit of blood stop you from achieving what you intend to achieve. So I asked the question of what's the benefit here. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on. Normalizing blood, exactly. Um, and yeah, women engaged in sports. Yeah, I think that relates. I'm not sure that I would even, that I can even say in a few words what the benefit is, but it is kind of empowering and stigma breaking, um, really breaking up a social norm. So they've, they very consciously wanted to get edgy with this. And, when I think of how we try to destigmatize, we don't usually go out on this kind of an edge. But personally, I like what they did, and I think we can draw some inspiration from it. They're appealing, I think, to a fairly what's the word, educated, sophisticated segment. But I think an important point in this ad is that the appeal is to values. Values of achievement and accomplishment, and don't let anything stop you, and you can do it, and much more, and don't let a little period, don't let a little blood stop you, and now that kind of appeal, that kind of value, those kinds of values won't work for everyone, but everyone has core values. For some, it might be a sense of belonging, the need to be accepted in a group. So don't take values for granted. Not everybody prioritizes the same values, but everybody prioritizes values. And if you can speak to those values, you have your hands and fingers on a powerful point of leverage. Okay, so let's move on a bit. And not gonna, sorry, as nice as it is. Okay, not sure if I want to show this. This, I was looking for ads that went viral, and here's one that went viral. And all right, let's just do it. And we're not going to say a lot about it, but just notice it has a few qualities. One of which is that I don't think there are any words that are spoken. So let's watch this. And I'm not going to take a lot of comments, but feel free to put comments into Slido about benefits, values, features that you see in this ad, and the behavior maybe. Okay, so we're not going to have a lot of time to discuss this, but as I said, yeah, compassionate heroes. It's part of, they call it their hero campaign. This was an actual video. This was not something that was shot for the ad. This was an actual video. and something that they've been trying to promote through social media of having people submit videos that were captured in real life with GoPro cameras. It has an air of authenticity, that kind of adventure achiever, people who live on the edge and in this case save lives. So a different set of values. Again, this is an appeal to a user. It shows you what you might be able to do with the product rather than talking about the product itself. Yeah, and that kitten, I don't even like cats, but it really sucked me right in. I was so worried about that kitten. And when it meowed, I mean, wasn't that great? And these big strong guys, cradling that little tiny kitten, it really drags you right in. So, um, the when we look at behaviors, benefits, features, notice where some of these folks are putting the emphasis. They're putting their emphasis on system one, things that tear at your heart. Be a hero, and authenticity, deep values. They're speaking to who we are or who we conceive ourselves to be, and there's really no difference. If you want to speak to people's identity, who they are and who they consider themselves to be or who they want to be is almost identical. So, and that's what these ads are speaking to. And I think when we're speaking in our messages, we have to keep that in mind. What are the values of the person that we're trying to communicate with? And be respectful of their experience and their values. Okay, so a couple of additional considerations. I'm going to move through this a little bit quickly so we can wrap up. So in the areas that we're dealing with, of course, we're dealing with uncertainty, trust, and credibility. So a few tactics, I would say, that we haven't really talked about. The Elvis Presley example is from the 1950s polio campaign, where the campaign had been relatively successful among children, but was having had hit the skid, so to speak, with teens, and teens were not they did not have good coverage levels with teens, and they enlisted Elvis as an ambassador for polio and turned the situation around rather remarkably in a relatively short period of time. The Tylenol poisoning case in 1982, Tylenol pulled out all stops, took product off the shelf, gave full refunds, took responsibility, was very authentic and transparent, and did a really good demonstration of prioritizing their customers over their own profit. And they were acknowledged for that. They were the leading pain reliever before the scandal. People said they will never recover. They recovered every inch of their leading market share afterwards because they were authentic, because they were transparent, and because it seemed that they valued their customers more than they valued a little bit of profit. And then the other picture, I'm not sure exactly where it's from, but when we run into issues, it's always good to go to the community, go to community leaders, go to spokespeople, go to leaders of faith. It's a good way to negotiate with our communities. Channels, I think I talked about this already. There are many different channels that we use. The best campaigns provide an integrated use of channels, whether that's mass media, social media. The best are always a combination. And just remember that because something is a mass media, it doesn't mean that it can't be interactive. Radio can be two-way. If you can get onto TV, into a talk show or radio talk show, call-in program, some of these media that seem like they're one-way communication can be much more interactive than one might think. And interactive is always better than one way. Look for media that are credible. We've mapped this. There's data that exists for many countries about the degree of credibility that different media have. Generally, health workers, doctors, nurses have high credibility, but low coverage. Television is a mixed bag depending on the country. It can be very credible in some places. Social media is often seen as not credible, although that varies by the type of social media and, of course, who sends you the message. And I'm going to show just one example, this one from the Philippines. This was an integrated campaign that drew on social media as well as mass media. It also used, like GoPro, it used a hero. Beta actually is a word that means hero, and they used it in a very clever way to promote behaviors related to COVID. So let's take a look at how the Philippines executed this campaign.
Patuloy pa rin ang laban natin sa COVID-19. And together, we can beat the solution.
B. Bawal walang mask.
I. Isanitize sa mga kamay. Iwas hawak sa mga bagay.
D. Dumistansya ng 1 metro.
A. Alamin ang totoong impormasyon tungkol sa COVID-19.
Protektahan natin ang sarili at mga mahal sa buhay.
B-I-D-A. Be the solution sa COVID-19.
Okay, so just to wrap up, I don't want to, I have to apologize for going over time. I hope that we were able to draw some lessons. I know I dug deep into some advertising examples, and I hope you drew some lessons from that. Here are some of the, the takeaways that I get from this, and that I want to reinforce. So how do we apply some of these lessons? Well, consumer insights, use every opportunity, whether it's talking to people on the street, doing focus groups, doing one-on-one interviews, or using some of the human-centered design tools like journey mapping. Negotiating behaviors. I can't stress the importance of this enough. I think we often get into trouble when we become very prescriptive about our behaviors. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes behaviors are negotiable, like safe burial practices. So starting with conversations in the community, dealing with community leaders, see if you can adjust behaviors to accommodate community values and norms. Some of these other points I think you know very well. Stories are easier to remember. Speak to who people are and their values. Always look for the values. See if you can reach beyond the immediate message to the value. Lead with benefits. Features are secondary. Be clear on individual benefits, not just social. Social benefits do appeal to some individuals, but not all. That iconic tiger, will not appeal to everyone. Don't expect that facts will work on their own. Acknowledge fear, but make sure that there's a positive pathway. A lot of mischief is created when people feel that they're losing control, when they go into, and I think in these sessions, you're learning that when people fear that they're losing control, that they're not in control of a situation, they look for ways that they can gain control. And one of the ways that they do that is they find some conspiracy theory or some person to blame so that they can figure it out, and it gives them a sense of control. So be careful with the whole issue of fear. Spokespeople, role models, engaging community members, these can work very well, and they can often work very well with specific segments of audiences that maybe are harder to reach or harder to persuade. And then map your positioning vis-a-vis competition, and know that there always is competition. I just saw Anthony Fauci, and I was trying to figure out what his positioning was, but authenticity is a positioning. Truth, the Truth campaign, truth was their positioning. So positioning doesn't have to be manipulative. It can be very authentic as well. So with that, I will say thank you.